Hey everybody and welcome now. Let's start this off. So this is a webinar with us from Signific and Johan here from Steep. So a little bit about myself first. So I am Valdemar Finta. I work as a data and analytics engineer consultant here at Signific. I have some previous experiences at companies such as Hemnet and Soundtrack. We here at Signific help companies learn faster than their competitors by democratizing their data. And we're about almost 20 senior consultants now with experience from top tech companies across the Nordics. And now to you, Johan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Johan Baltzar, co-founder and CEO at Steep. I've been a data leader for more than 10 years. I think I started at Spotify 10 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun, and I've been at some other tech companies as well. So Steep, we started Steep in 2021, and it's based on some of the frustrations that I've had over the years in building data teams, building data stacks, and trying to serve a lot of end users with data, especially in these kind of data-hungry technology companies. So Steep, we got excited about this kind of new paradigm based on the semantic layer and based on metrics, and try to solve the same BI problems, but do it in a completely new way.
So to today's topic, democratizing metrics with Steep. We have an agenda that looks like this. We'll first start talking about the common analytics stacks and some problems that I see with it. Then we're going to look into the dashboard first approach in tackling those problems, going deeper into what exactly that approach hopes to solve. Then we're going to look at the typical implementation of such an approach. Then we're going to look at the metrics first approach and talk a little bit why metrics are hard, why they're hard to work with, and take a look at some good principles to have when you work with metrics to make sure that they are democratized. Then Johan is going to talk a bit more, show us a demo with Steep, and then we'll come to that Q&A at the end. So first of all, democratized data is a state where data is easily used to answer your questions and explore new questions in a trustworthy way. And with this, we want to enable different things. We want to be able to evaluate the company performance and OKRs accurately. We want to dive deep and analyze customers' behaviors. And we want to be able to prioritize the product features and business development, and in general become a learning organization. So let's talk about the common analytics stack. The common analytics stack probably looks something like this, where we to the left have our databases, we have APIs, we have events and other types of data that are fed into our data warehouse. It comes in as raw data, and then we have some kind of transformation that we do, maybe using dbt, to model that data, to make it more easily used through our different dashboarding tools or different data endpoints. And we do most often have different dashboarding tools, maybe preferably used by different teams having different preferences, using different type of dashboarding tools with multiple dashboards in them. Then we also, of course, have some ad hoc requests where we need to dive into the data. And this stack typically serves a big part of the organization, but maybe mainly marketing, helping them to evaluate their performance and setting up the budgets. And our product, deep diving into how our users are interacting with the product. We have finance who wants to understand more about the financials, maybe have some projections. We have a management who wants some general reporting and some good foundation to make decisions. Now, some problems I see with this stack is that it's hard to know what the truth is. So we have most of the time inconsistent data across these different tools, causing a confusion and lack of trust in the data. We also have complicated modeling, since one metric probably has multiple implementations in these different dashboards for these different teams and in models, which means it's very complicated to model and use this data. And that means that we also have a slow data service. Since we have so much work to do, it takes time for the data team to actually serve this data to the users. So what the analytics stack should enable is consistency. We want the whole organization to be able to align on what the truth is and trust that truth. We want to have self-service where we have users that can explore and build dashboards and reports themselves. And we want to have fast data service with a data team that can update, implement new requests and updates fast. So as an overview, we kind of want to go from a state over here to the left where we have this no single truth, complicated modeling, slow data service, to a state here in the middle where we have consistent truth, we have self-service, and we have fast data service. And we want that to enable data democratization, which then enables the strategic values here, where we can evaluate our performance, we can dive deep into our customer behaviors, we can actually set prioritizations for product development, and we can have a learning culture. So the typical solution that I've seen to this is to simply have one analytics tool to rule them all. I call this approach the dashboard first approach to tackle these problems. So what is a dashboard first approach? Well, it's going from this, the typical stack we just talked about earlier, into a stack that now looks like this, where we just have one single BI tool, where we have centralized all our dashboards, our different dashboarding tools we had talked about earlier, into just a single BI tool with all our dashboards contained within it. And the idea is that since we now only have one central BI tool, it's much easier to control the data inside of that tool, so we can achieve consistent truth. And we can achieve self-service within that tool as well. And that would mean fast data service, since we only have that single tool to service for all our users. So how would this solve our needs in a bit more detail? Well, basically, first of all, we need to connect this BI tool to our data warehouse. So we have views and we have tables in our data warehouse, and we need to connect that into sources in our BI tool. Then inside of these sources, we would need to model our data, which means that we would need to define our metrics and dimensions in these data sources. And then with this modeled data, we can reuse it in creating dashboards inside of this tool. And we just repeat this for as many dashboards as we want and need. So is this what happens in practice then? Well, no, not quite. We tend to end up in just the same situation as we were before. So now that we have centralized everything in the BI tool, we still have to make some ad hoc queries to answer some questions that can't be served easily in a BI tool. And not just that, but you probably have more data endpoints than you think initially. So besides the BI tool and ad hoc queries that you have to run in your data warehouse, you might have experimentation that is connected to your data warehouse. You might have reverse ETL from your data warehouse, where you want to send out data to other types of tools to activate your data in some kind of ways. And then maybe you have some machine learning notebooks or tools that you want to run on top of your data warehouse as well. So this means that we often use the same metric, but in multiple places here in all of these different data endpoints. So let's take an example and have a think about this. So if you think about churn rate in our BI tool, that's probably something that we have defined, we can show in dashboards to inform people about the churn rate. But then maybe we have to run some ad hoc queries on the churn rate. We want to dive deeper to see what's actually going on. And then maybe churn rate is included in some type of experimentation. We want to see how something affects the churn rate. And then we might have reverse ETL, where we want to activate our churned users somehow. And then we have machine learning applications where maybe we want to predict churn. And the problem is that this same metric of churn can differ depending on this endpoint. And that is because it is now implemented in different endpoints. It is first defined in the BI tool as churn rate to be used in dashboards. But then as well as we realize that we need to look at churn rate in ad hoc queries, we need to define it there when we run our queries. We need to define it again when we want to connect our data warehouse to an experimentation platform. We have to define it again when we want to do reverse ETL to send away our churned users to some kind of tool or system. And we have to do it again when we write machine learning applications or notebooks. So to summarize, we are still here to the left. We still don't really have a single truth, and we still have complicated modeling, and we still have a slow data service because we're still spread out across these different types of data endpoints that we just talked about. So the idea that we first had that we would be able to achieve consistent truth inside of this BI tool just because we're in that single tool, and self-service because we're in that single tool, isn't really achieved because what we're doing is not contained within that tool. So the dashboard first approach is really about serving a tool to our users. But what we actually want to do is serve metrics to our users. So we should think about the metrics first. Let's do that then. That is what I call the metrics first approach. So first of all, what is a metric? Well, it's a quantifiable measurement used to evaluate performance of some type of activity or process in an organization. And almost anything an organization or a company does can be measured. So within product, we probably have metrics related to the users in their interaction with our product, such as active users, conversion rates, retention rate. Finance probably has a bunch of metrics regarding the finance, of course, with revenue, CLV, refunds. The support team probably have metrics like churn, number of support calls, net promoter score, and marketing, of course, have metrics regarding their spend, their conversion rates, their cost per acquisition, and then also sales, of course, wanting to understand the sales process with signups, subscription, and renewal rates. And the list goes on and on and on. So why are metrics hard to solve or to work with? Well, even simple metrics can be quite tricky in reality to define and really nail what they mean and what they are. So if we take an example here, let's first start with trying to define what a user is, since a user is central to a lot of other metrics definitions, such as churn or CLV or many other types of definitions. So what should we define as a user in our organization? Should we say that a sign-up is a user, or should we maybe say that a sign-up and a sign-in qualifies you as a user? Or should we say that it's a sign-up plus a sign-in or an install maybe of if we have an app, or maybe some type of action within our app that qualifies you as a user? And then when we have this definition, should we then count you per the device ID that you use to interact with our product or service? Should we look at your account ID or maybe your pseudo ID? Yeah, there's lots of different ways to build your metrics and to define them. It's usually a bit more difficult than you first think. So what's the key success to working with metrics then, if they are hard to work with? Well, I see it as you first need to understand that working with metrics is a cross-functional effort within your organization. So you really need the expertise of stakeholders across your organization to come together to discuss and set the definition of a metric and to document that for it to be useful. And then it would become more of the responsibility of a data and analytics team to take that definition to actually implement it in the data. So going to our metrics principles here, we have 5 principles that I have identified by looking at different companies and organizations that I think are successful in working with their metrics, but we'll go deeper into them soon. Yeah, I mentioned this before about metrics being a cross-functional effort. So going back to this definition that we said about, we wanted to dive deeper into metric principles, that really when it comes to metric ownership and metric documentation, that is something that falls within the responsibility of the entire organization, because you really need everybody to come together to understand what a metric is to build that correctly. And the data team's responsibility is then taking that, making sure that's a single implementation of that metric, making sure that metric is consistent across tools that are used by our users. And then it's the responsibility for end users to actually decide if this is a good setup that is easily used by them. So how can you follow these principles? Well, let's start to the left here with the principles that fall within the responsibility of the entire organization, the metric ownership and the documentation. So metric ownership and documentation really goes hand in hand, and is something you should do at the same time. So when it comes to documentation and ownership, you should really start simple. Just use a simple spreadsheet where you start list all that you need. So let's start. At the beginning, you should probably prioritize your metrics together with the stakeholders to see which are the most important ones you should start with. Probably the ones with the most business value. Here are some examples of that. And then you need to assign each metric to a metric owner. And that metric owner should be somebody who is the actual producer of that metric, or maybe who is most knowledgeable about this metric. And this metric owner is very important because it needs to be a go-to person when there's questions about the metric, when it looks wrong, if there's an update that needs to be done, if there's changes in source system that needs to be communicated downstream for the metric definitions to be up to date. So you need to have a metric owner, but you also need an implementation owner. An implementation owner is somebody or the entire data team to be referred to questions around this metric when it comes to more technical aspects of the actual implementations. And you need to write down all of this together with both owners, really in a simple language, so that both business and tech can understand what it is. And then you need also probably to include some kind of technical docs to make it easier to actually track and update your metrics for the data and analytics team. Now, this template that I just showed you, or this data, is from a template that we have built internally, and you can download a copy of that actually. There should be a pop-up right now with a link. So if you want to have a look at that to get some inspiration, to try it out yourself or to use somehow, yeah, check out that link. Now, ownership and documentation helps really with understanding the metrics across the organization. It lays the foundation for you to work with it across your organization. And now it's time to have a look at how we can actually implement our metrics. So when it comes to the implementation, which lies within the responsibility of the data team, we start with the single implementation here. What that means is we really want a metric to be implemented just once, not to be scattered among our different data endpoints that we talked about before, but to be contained into just one place. So in this case, it makes more sense to put it here in the transformation layer where we actually work with our data in our data warehouse. And then the second principle when it comes to consistency across tools, which is also part of the data team's responsibility. This can then be achieved by this single implementation in the transformation layer, which means that your data is correct in the data warehouse. So then when you connect your BI tool, your queries, your experimentation, your reverse ETL, your machine learning to your data, they will always be the same because they are connecting to the same data model that you implemented once. However, this is really hard to achieve and probably impossible to do to 100% degree. And the challenges with this is that a single implementation is not really possible because a metric often needs to be repeated in multiple models in your transformation layer. So we talked about user. So for example, a definition of a user really needs to be repeated in lots of other metrics, or metrics such as revenue probably also need to be repeated in lots of other metrics. So that means that you can't just implement it once in a single place, but it needs to be implemented and modeled in multiple models in your transformation layer. And also a metric might need to be implemented both in this transformational layer in your data warehouse, but also in your BI tool. So let's say, for example, we take churn rate, which is a rate. Since it's a rate, you cannot pre-aggregate it to get the correct answer in our transformation layer. Since when we show that number in the BI tool, a user might want to select or deselect a dimension, do some type of filtering, which means that that rate needs to be calculated on the fly in the BI tool. So we can't pre-aggregate it and set it up once in the transformation layer in our data warehouse. It needs to be done in the BI tool as well. And then when it comes to consistency, it's really hard to avoid any errors across these different tools that we talked about. It's very easy to make just a single mistake, and then the data will be different. That means that it's also very hard to monitor and keep track of every dashboard and every endpoint in its use of data to make sure that it is consistent. So how do we handle that? Well, the answer to that is the semantic layer. The definition of a semantic layer used to be, at least pre-2024, probably something like this, that it's the meta definitions you build into your data. So that will be the way that you model your data in your transformation layer. But now the semantic layer probably more popularly refers to a technical solution that is actually layered between your data and any tool and user wanting to interact with your data. And what this technical layer does is ensure that your metrics are always used in the correct way from your data warehouse in whatever tool or user are interacting with that data. But we don't really have time to dive deeper into the semantic layer here. But my colleague Max Krug had an excellent webinar together with Ernesto from DBT last month in February. So go check that out. It's on our webpage, and there should be a pop-up right now that you can click as well. But yeah, check that out for a much more in-depth view of the semantic layer. So now to the last metric principle, that our metrics is easily used by our users. Well, metrics needs to be visualized for them to be able to be interactable with our users, really. And that needs to happen. We need some kind of easy to use UI for it to work. So choosing the right BI and dashboarding tool plays an important role here. And that role is that it needs to be able to be consistent and work with the principles we set up before. We want to define and work with our metric once. We want to implement it once, and it needs to be consistent. And it needs to be easily used by our users. So yeah, now it's time for Steep. I personally work with Steep. I like the system a lot, and I've had great feedback from end users in that system talking about how good the experience was for them to interact with metrics and data. But yeah, enough about that. I think Johan can talk about this way better than I can.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, Valle. I think we've also been super happy to be working with you guys, you specifically, I think, at Signific. I think we're both excited about the same thing, this idea of using metrics, using a semantic layer to serve a whole organization in a smarter way. So with Steep, we got excited about this 2.5 years ago, kind of figuring out that semantic layer, metrics-based BI, has the opportunity to be truly like a new paradigm, like doing BI, but doing it in a new way. And we kind of gone all in on this together with our customers and partners. I think what we've learned, and kind of adding to your points, Valle, because you're kind of coming at this from the data side, which is great. And it's like, yes, this is a much more kind of structured, systematic way of working on the data side. But I think what we learned is like the benefits are almost greater on the end user side, so on the business side of things. So I think what you can do kind of high level, like what we usually, when we talk about this, is like, using a semantic layer and using kind of metrics based BI, you can basically like ship a metrics catalog, to the organization along with a lot of dimensions. And then you can basically let all the users kind of do their own BI, in this kind of flexible and controlled environment, which is great and pretty different, I think, from the way that we've been doing things for the last 10 or 15 years. Certainly the way I've been doing it with my teams. I mean, I think what we do with Steep is like, we want to kind of go all in on the metrics and dimensions. And I think the cool thing is that when we are on that kind of a slightly higher level of abstraction, like we're using metrics and dimensions as the core building blocks, that allows us to build a tool that is much more intuitive. Like we used to say that it's kind of built for all users, not just the analyst, but it's like all the regular folks across the company are like the intended end users of this. And you're trying to make this feel more like a Notion or a Figma. So I think for us data folks, what it allows us to do is that we can kind of take a step back and focus on the data model and the definitions, your metrics definitions. And then we can kind of give a lot of flexibility to all the people across the business that we're meant to serve, and kind of let them help themselves, basically. And we don't have to kind of spoon feed them as much as maybe we've done before, which I think is really cool. So to give you guys just like like an overview of what this looks like in practice. So if you've done all the good work that Valle showed you about defining your metrics and actually kind of make sure that you have the data ready in your data model, what you can end up with, it was basically like this nice metrics catalog that you can kind of give to the whole company. So here you can have like nicely named and defined metrics coming out of your semantic layer, and with nice descriptions and definitions, all those details, but also create a nice structure, with different categories for the whole company. And also owners, to your point, Vale, I think is super important, both on the data side, like who's the kind of the technical owner of this, but also on the business side of things, right? Because this is almost like a contract between the data side and the business side. So I think it's important to kind of define your metrics together with the right stakeholders on the business side. So all this is nice, documentation is great, but I think the really cool thing is that now like any end user can come in here and find what they need. So say I'm in marketing and I care a lot about kind of registrations or like ad spend or ad CTR. I can just find my metric, start clicking on it, and then start to analyze and explore and do my own reporting. And this is of course in Steep, we spent a lot of kind of product design thinking in like how do we make this like super flexible and powerful, but like so intuitive and nice, so that like you can give this to any end user and they can start doing this totally by themselves. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that the kind of metrics based way of working allows. So you can just click on a metric and then you're in there and you're starting to explore things. So it's less, you're not like building visualizations, you're more like exploring them in a sense. So here we have all the regular stuff, BI stuff, like controls over time. You can switch time grains on the fly, which is great, different kinds of visualizations to serve all those needs. I think that one of the newer things also with the metrics-based way of working, it kind of allows for this kind of composable analysis. So you can just like add different kind of metrics on top of each other, and we can then kind of overlay them on the visualization. And you don't need to kind of go back and change your data or change the query, because we're kind of just querying using the semantic layer. We're just querying each metric individually, and then we can kind of overlay them on in the client, which is really nice. And then finally, on the kind of the content side of things, we've kind of taken the same lens there. It's like the big opportunity here is to enable everyone to do much more themselves, and we kind of worked our way to a slightly updated format for doing this. So it's not exactly dashboards, it's more like closer to a document format is how it works in Steep. So if you try to kind of Notion or Google Docs, I think this feels very familiar and kind of solves all the dashboarding needs, but also a lot of the kind of the reporting or deep dives or investigations. So some of these are kind of ideas coming from the kind of the notebook products and stuff like that. I think the important thing is that this is so easy and feels so familiar, is what we found with our customers, that you can give this to any end user and they can start to do their own thing, right? You don't have to kind of go and ask the data team to produce your content anymore, which is great. And I think importantly here, all the visualizations and all the numbers are just kind of referencing down to the semantic layer. So when inevitably you want to go back and kind of update your metrics, so say you have a revenue metric, so when you go back and you just update that metric centrally, it will just populate and update all of the numbers and all of the content that anyone has ever created, because we're always kind of using the latest version of that metric everywhere in the workspace. So you get this beautiful built-in consistency, which is one of the big headaches I think that we've struggled with for so long. It's building more content means more things to maintain, but with this model, it's so scalable, it's so structured, that you can kind of allow more people to go a little bit crazy on the content side, because you're always kind of in this defined environment, which is really cool. So I think with that was a little bit high level, a little bit about the concepts and the benefit. And I thought we could hopefully we'll try to also do a bit of a quick demo here. So now we're in Steep in the desktop app with some demo data here. So this is the metrics catalog that I was talking about. So here's, when we've done that work and define metrics in the semantic layer. And that could be in, we have this kind of built-in semantic layer in Steep. It could also be in dbt or Cube or any of those kind of external semantic layer APIs. They show up here and they're kind of published and available for any users to start using. So if I click on registrations here, the semantic layer will use the metrics definition to generate the query, run that in the connected data warehouse, get the results back, and then start to visualize kind of automatically. You can double check here what things are going, actually doing what it says it should. And then of course, there's a lot of flexibility for the end users to change time grains, jump back and forth in time, to explore breakdowns, filters, and all of this is again kind of controlled by the metrics definitions and the semantic layer. So as on the data side of things, we can kind of curate here both what kind of metrics, but also what kind of dimensions are available for people to use. And there's some other, here's the kind of where the composability kind of comes in, where you can add both metrics. So maybe we want to add ad spend here on top of our registrations, but you could also add targets, kind of load target data, and also kind of tie it neatly to specific metrics, which is really nice. And then I just wanted to touch on the reporting side of things as well. So the beautiful thing here is adding content is as easy as kind of picking the right metric and then adjusting for what you want. Let's add spend here as well. So you can imagine that this is so quick and easy and intuitive. You're just using the metrics, you're getting that list of metrics, using those same dimensions, and it's so so much more available to kind of any end users, which is great. All right, I think I'll stop the demo there and hand it back over to you, Vale.
Yes, thank you. Just to summarize this then. So start working with your metrics before you start working with the tool, and you should set clear principles for how you want to implement your metrics in such a tool. Then choose a BI tool that suits a metrics first approach, such as Steep. Thank you all, and let's move on to the last part, which was the Q&A then. Question: does Steep only use the dbt semantic layer API, or does it support SQL query generation based on the semantic layer definitions?
Yeah, so exactly. So we kind of support any number of semantic layers. So we have our kind of built-in one in Steep. So it kind of comes with its kind of built-in semantic layer. And there we have a kind of UI-based approach to defining metrics, which is kind of nice. It's very quick and fast and intuitive. So there you can, using your metadata from your connected data warehouse, you can define metrics in a nice way. And there's also the opportunity to use kind of SQL expressions to get more flexibility there. And then we also support kind of connecting the DBT semantic layer or the cube semantic layer as well, and probably more coming over time. So you can actually then like choose to say like, do I want to define my metrics with the UI in Steep, or do I want to define them in code? And maybe have like the nice thing, I guess, with DBT semantic layer is that you can have the code for your data model, in your DBT project, but you can also have the metrics definitions in the same project, which is kind of cool. And then you can have that kind of lineage that kind of connects all the way from sources all the way to metrics, which is nice. And then you can kind of connect and publish it in Steep and start using those metrics and publish them to a whole organization. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and there's some pros and cons, I think, for what you want to choose, but we try to be very flexible there. You can even use kind of both approaches together, if that answers your questions.
Great. I see we also have a question here from Lovisa, which is, which one of the 5 principles is the hardest to do? I would say that the hardest one is probably one of the first one, which is like metric ownership. Just being able to set that metric ownership for a person to own that metric and to define it and to continually update it. That's really hard, and because it really needs cooperation across the entire organization to do. So you need to have an understanding of what value this brings to work with metrics for people to actually have the motivation to be engaged in such a project. So yeah, I would definitely say that one.
I think in adding to that, I think from my experience, it's good if we in the data team can kind of, take a step forward, and kind of like push this idea of using metrics, and then, kind of challenge our businesses in like, hey, if we haven't clearly defined metrics, if we don't know what our core metrics are, then like, what are we doing? Like, how are we supposed to be a data-driven organization? So I think I've always viewed it as part of my job and my team's job to make sure that the companies that I work in have kind of clearly defined metrics, and we know kind of how do we run this business. So I would kind of encourage everyone to, like, if your company doesn't have clearly defined metrics, then they probably should, and you should probably, challenge that and see what you can do. So even if you kind of come at it from the data side, maybe it won't be like 100% the right metrics or the right definitions, but it's good to start somewhere. And then usually that sparks a conversation with the business side. And then eventually you will kind of iterate your way to like what the right metrics are and what the definitions are. But I would say it's like good just to get started.
Great answer. Let's see, we got another question from Rasmus here. Let's see. Since the SQL is generated dynamically, it will act as a direct query towards the database, ? If so, do you experience issues with long query times?
I think the key here, there's a couple of keys here. It's like, I guess short answer is no. And the reason is basically everyone is running the same metrics on a set of cuts, with some along the same dimensions. And you can use caching here to make this very snappy. So usually it's like the first person in the morning kind of warms up the cache, and then it's kind of snappy for everyone. So we found it works really nice. You can get a really nice and snappy experience for a lot of end users without generating too much load on your data warehouse. But it might be that the first person in the morning that it's up early and checking the numbers might have a little bit longer load times.
So guys,